Right. So, on behalf of the LaRouche Political Action Committee, my name is Dennis Speed, and I'm welcoming you here today. We had a conference a couple of days ago which began the process, which we are going to now amplify here and deepen here. As those of you who were there know that there was a very lively second session, and Mr. LaRouche was able to, in his capacity uh, as dialoguer in chief, give some people a lesson in what it meant to actually try to think about asking questions. It was a great occasion to see that. And in any case, I think we're going to resume right where we left off last time. So, Lynn, I'd like to first ask you if there's anything you'd like to say at the beginning, and otherwise we'll start the questions.
I would say simply that there was a confusion there, which was resolved, I think, in the process of presentation, to recognize exactly what the principles are on which the human voice and mind are capable of understanding each other. And I think that's the key mission, is to get a recognition among people of what the truths are, as opposed to some of the jazzed up work which does not actually amount to anything in terms of art.
Maybe we'll have a few questions in that regard a little later. So let's go right to questions. Let's take our first question.
Put it down a little bit. Thank you.
Ah, good.
Hi, good morning, afternoon.
Young lady.
This is Jessica from Brooklyn, New York, and I want to start by, I think something, can you still hear?
I'm here. Oh, him?
Hello? No, it's still there, okay. I wanted to start by talking a little bit about what people have said to me about the conference and how I've thought about the conference in response. I thought it was wonderful. I thought it was one of the best conferences that we've had. And people are saying, well, what did you like about the conference? What are some of your ideas? And then you really have to think, well, what was it that I liked about the conference, and what are some of my ideas? So in thinking about that and coming up with why I really liked the conference and what was accomplished, I thought about, was it the speakers? Was it their subjects? Was it the way that they presented their information? From Helga in her opening remarks that were fantastic and got us into the right vein of thinking about what's going on in the world? Was it the Chinese presenter? Was it the Korean presenter? Was it the Egyptian person? And I think it was all of that, all of the people that presented and all of the subjects that they talked about. But then, in the question and answer period, that is what really kind of stuck out in my mind. After a barrage of statements and non-questions from the audience, Keisha Rogers said something that I actually wrote down, and I'm going to repeat it right now. It's not all these little issues. It's not all this stuff you're talking about, climate change over here, which is ridiculous, and all these other things that are important. But what it really is that this is the threat to your humanity. And that's what this was about, the threat to our humanity. And in thinking about that, the entire thing came together to me as peace through development. And I think one of our pamphlets, one of our EIR pamphlets said, peace, development is the name for peace. And I could kind of sum that up also in what the Chinese speaker was saying when he took his group through China and they ran into obstacles. They saw wonderful, beautiful things, but then they also ran into groups that were considered terrorists, but would sign on, would put their interest into development for their country. And then they would agree with the things that the Silk Road represents. And so the peace through development idea is there. And I want the American people to respond in that way? How do we get the American people to respond to the idea that the Silk Road and all these other concepts, the space program represents as peace through development? And I'd like you to kind of comment on that for us, please.
Okay. Well, the whole question of yeah, see, this we get an interruption here. Let's try it now again. What the crucial thing that I ran into in the discussion process around this, where people were quarreling around this and arguing this and arguing that, and I simply said no, because there are certain principles which do define the function of the human being, a true function of a true human being. And that's what you have to go for. You have to find out what the truth is and understand why it is the proper instruction to mankind for the future of mankind. The problems that arose in some people's minds was they wanted to bring into all kinds of explanations other than the name of human. And our point is that everything is based on the principle of human. And that principle of human has to be defined correctly as being the intention to bring mankind to a higher level of achievement for the future of mankind, and that is the most important issue in the whole thing.
Okay, thank you.
Next question.
Hello, young man. I'm here from Montreal. I want to start by just giving a report from the organizing during the conference. I was sitting with two young gentlemen under the age of 25, and they were getting very frustrated during this questions and answers period. And one of the things they were saying was like, "Oh, he's just gonna answer the same thing about creativity." And what they were really responding to was this series of bad questions and how people weren't understanding what you were saying about creativity and this uniqueness of the human mind. And we went out to lunch afterwards and we got to talking, and I really just laid out why you were answering this way. And it was funny because they started to really understand and then actually experience that principle in action. We started talking about things like Brunelleschi's dome and why to build beautiful buildings, or how the oligarchy is really controlling people. And they were just, at the end, they came out very inspired, but it started with some frustration. And there was one thing that you said that really stuck with me from when you were, answering, and I'll paraphrase. You said something like, science is the process of moving what's in the mind into physical reality. So my question is, how do you define what science actually is? And then how can we think more scientifically in the way that Einstein or a Kepler or yourself do?
Well, there's a certain principle there which can be described summarily, but I don't like to describe it summarily because it's much more complicated than that. The point is that we all are able, if we wish to recognize what the meaning of life is, human life is. And people will know it, recognize it from themselves. People who are of any sensitivity at all will recognize this at all. That this is something which is for man, by man, and so forth, and for the future of mankind. But those principles which I quoted during the course of that argument there are the universal principles, as far as I know. These are the principles on which the foundation of mankind's understanding of himself depends. Once they recognize this, they have no choice but to recognize the truth.
Okay, thank you, Len.
Next, please.
Hello, Lynn. My name is Aaron from Montreal, Canada. I just want to say, first of all, that I'm honored to be here. I've been following what this organization has been doing for about a year now. I came here, I wanted to ask a question, and I actually asked this to Dennis Speed when during a phone call in Montreal. How can we, as organizers, when we go out and organize, stick to a certain tradition of beauty and conveying beauty while still trying to expose the ugliness within the culture? And I have an example is that yesterday while we were organizing, I heard in particular one term where one of the organizers, can you still hear me? Yeah. Okay. One of the organizers was mentioning Congress as being whores for Wall Street. And it brought up a thought in my mind, is that how can we still expose the ugliness within the culture without falling into the ugliness within language? And how can we use a certain language that respects the tradition of beauty and exposing beauty through truth?
Well, simply, you have to understand, you say, what is satanic? Just ask the question, what is actually satanic in the common practice of mankind? You say acts of cruelty against other people, cheating, lying, so forth, as opposed to the simple idea of the desire to fulfill something which makes their life have been meaning for the future of mankind. That means, what is the progress that we can contribute as individuals toward the progress of mankind? This is the basis on which different nations or nationalities can come together with a common intention, is to get that common intention which creates the success of the human species among all participants in human perception. And every nation, every nationality has a requirement to find in itself something which is truly universal to mankind.
Thank you.
Next question.
Hi, thank you for having us here. My question is, why or why won't our expanding noosphere catch up with the expanding universe?
Well, actually, we are all part of the universe. All of us are. And the meaning of our existence is of that nature. What do we contribute by our existence, by our development, by our practice of development? What do we contribute to the totality of mankind? Now, in the recent event we had this weekend, we had a test of that on a large scale for China. We got involved deeply in what some of the Chinese development is. And so the recognition of this thing which actually unifies humanity, in effect, as the demonstrations and the arguments and the proceedings showed, that is where mankind has to find its own identity, which means different kinds of inspections, different kinds of opinions, different kinds of this and so forth, but they almost come back to one thing, and that one thing is the power of mankind, the power of the human individual when realized. And that is the one thing which unifies all people, the ability to access a common progress of a better future for the totality of mankind and mankind's mission for the universe.
Thank you.
Next question.
Good afternoon, Len. I'm Dan from the Detroit area. I'm a veteran. I belong to at least 3 different veterans groups, and I was wondering why there aren't more veterans, gravitating toward the organization and what we do here, because you're working toward preventing a number of future wars and things like that. And what is there that you think we can do in order to convince more veterans to be involved with what we're doing?
Well, first of all, you can start with Franklin Roosevelt, because Franklin Roosevelt was treated like a bum in the closing period of his life. So he was one of the greatest thinkers in the history of the United States in terms of the effect of what he contributed to a mankind which had been going into desperation and now was reconstructing itself, where people who were in the early 1930s were totally in despair. Just the ordinary citizen was usually totally in despair, or was a thief otherwise. And what happened is Franklin Roosevelt brought that citizen, who was often demoralized by what had subjected, and to cause them to aspire to accrete to something which is going to be greater for the purpose of mankind generally. And what's happened is that those in the system of government, like the certain people in the system, no good, no damn good at all, in fact. And so therefore we have so many no damn good candidates for leadership in the United States that we are sometimes ashamed of ourselves without asking and finding out why. But that's it. We have to fight for that purpose. We have to understand what the meaning of that purpose is of mankind. It's not just for soldiers, because every one of us is going to die. And therefore the question is, what is the meaning of our living in the process which we know is going to end with die? That means that you're looking at humanity not as an object. You're looking at humanity as something which has an intrinsic continuity in terms of the contributions. For example, what happens? People talk about life and death. Well, everyone dies. Every human being dies. It's unavoidable. Well, then what is the purpose of the person having lived? That's the question. It's not how we die. It's how we, in the process of our existing, have contributed and are continuing to contribute to the meaning of the future of mankind. And that is probably the simplest way of saying it.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, Lynn Alvin, here again talking to you from New York.
Yeah.
In coming off the, I did a fair amount of work leading into the conference and worked that day at the conference, but really caught just about everything that was taking place. And what I was really inspired by, and at the same time embarrassed as an American, was the international participation on the panel and the excellent ideas and representations of where they see their nations leading to, and of course, in essence, asking the United States to not wage war but join them in that process. But what I come out thinking today is, where do we go next? Where do we advance? What's our next move here in Manhattan as an extension of that process that was in 3 parts presented to us on Thursday? And my thinking here in New York is that we have the release of these documents, the 11 million documents called the Panama Papers. We have what will obviously be a widely seen broadcast on 60 Minutes, where the 28 pages will be gone through with many of the people that this organization has worked with and helped organize, and those important institutional figures that are now going to take a platform and let millions of Americans know. And then later in the week, we have Fred and Ethel, otherwise known as Bernie and Hillary, coming into town. So this is a week of opportunity. And I'd like to know from you how we should approach this week, since there's a lot for us to do around this, and the implications are vast.
I would say that, well, with some exceptional, brief exceptionals, relatively speaking, and among presidents and among others, even and most people, they are not very worth much at all. You know, you have to look at the question from the standpoint, as I do, from the standpoint of what is the meaning of a newborn baby? One that's going to live, or we can expect to live. Why do we put a value on that child or someone like that continuation? Because they are supposed to be not just living for a while, they are supposed to be able to develop in their self-development through mankind to bring the baby, the child, or the fortunate child at least, to bring them into a role which mankind has never achieved beforehand. In other words, the idea is to bring the baby, which is newborn baby, not to be a continuation of the parent as such, merely the parent. The question is, can this baby, this person, represent a future of mankind in the act of their own existence? That's the important thing. Having a baby is not what's important as such. What's happening is creating a system which creates babies and makes babies into future geniuses. And Einstein, for example, typifies that model. And for many of us today who've understood the history of Einstein and his problems, Einstein has always meant that. For us who understood this, that Einstein's role was a dedication to a discovery of the future, even when he would have died. Therefore, his existence is a permanent existence because it represents something which has never been overturned. And others should learn from his example.
Thank you, Lynn.
Mr. LaRouche, this is Rick from Bergen County, New Jersey. I have to modify my question from moment to moment because the topic that I wanted to bring up is being addressed today, and each of the questioners seems to touch on what I was originally intended to ask you. So we are talking about, you're talking about the issue of genius. And you mentioned Einstein. Einstein existed at late 19th, early 20th, and through the mid 20th century. And as I see it, the objective conditions surrounding Einstein weren't necessarily great. There was World War I, there was late 19th century, there was anti-Semitism. He had to move from Germany to New Jersey. And yet he was a genius. There's no doubt that the man was brilliant. And there have been many other cases of genius people who have done their great work under adversity. And you can go back, we all know specific cases. My question is, there seems to be a need for the cultivation of genius as a higher proportion of the population right now and going forward. How do you visualize, how do you see a system which would optimize or better grow this need for genius?
Take the history of the genius in terms of the United States, and take the founding leadership of the United States as such. Then look at what happened afterward. We had presidents. We had a whole string of presidents who were really treasonous in terms of their attitude about the nation. Then you had other people who came back, a few of them, as leaders in terms of the development of the United States. Beyond Lincoln, we had a few people who actually fill that kind of role of being a person whose life is devoted to creating a future for mankind. Not just a future for mankind, but a future for the improvement of mankind. And now what happened was that you had an evil bastard, I use the term freely, who became Bertrand Russell. And what Bertrand Russell did, he succeeded in getting most of the people who were then at that time considered scientists, and they all turned rotten, every one of them. And Einstein was the only man who really finished the policy of honesty in the development of the future of mankind and mankind's future. Some other people have made contributions. We want to talk about a systemic approach to the improvement of mankind and mankind's destiny. This is not just a step of progress. We were as a turn of back to evil, which was brought in by Bertrand Russell. And most people in the United States today are still worshipers of the policies of Bertrand Russell. They're still following. The school teachers, the university teachers in the United States today are mostly Bertrand Russell followers. They believe in simple mechanics in terms of science, They have no creativity whatsoever. And therefore, what we pressure is the idea of having children being born and knowing that those children will become something new and great beyond what has existed now. To hope that mankind will accede to actual progress of the development of the individual member of society. And that has been very much in jeopardy. And that's what's in jeopardy all the time. And that's what I like to fight about.
Thank you.
Hello, Lynn. This is Matthew from Montreal.
Good.
Well, it's been a privilege being able to participate in the Manhattan process since the Handel Messiah concerts began in December, and I've been able to work here for 3 weeks to help with the second Handel Messiah concert and the conference. And something that I've been struggling with that I'm hoping you can help out with is the fact that practicality has been something which we all tend to fall into, and there's a lot of pressure to bring truth into practical terms that people who don't know anything can understand, and thus there's a tendency towards wanting to get an effect, bringing people to an event, having an event. But the idea of actually winning, the intention to win, I realize that has not been something that, for the most of my experience as an organizer for the years that I've been doing this, I've not really had governing my world. And that, in general, the way I've been thinking, wrongly, has been that I've been trying to inoculate people against the evil of the culture at best, where you want to give people a sense of truth, and you could be protected, but the idea that we could actually win, until very recently, has not been a living concept organizing my mind. Now, this is completely different now that we, especially for me, being a part of this conference is a paradigm-shifting process. I know that if practicality was governing the minds of a Benjamin Franklin or Brunelleschi, not only would there never have been a dome, but there never would have been a Renaissance, and there never would have been a Declaration of Independence. And even if there hypothetically was, those things wouldn't have been continued because their intention to win allowed them to organize self-organizing processes that would always endure beyond their lifespan. So I was hoping that you could say a few words to help people like myself and others watching this internationally and in the audience to not fall back into practical terms and to keep the mind focused on creating self-organizing processes.
Yeah, I would say that's commendable. I think it's necessary. The thing to do is look at the idea of the concept of the baby, the human baby. And look at the meaning of what that human baby's birth should mean to humanity. which means that that child or some children like that are going to become a legion of people from whom a future of mankind will be newly created beyond anything that mankind has achieved previously. And therefore, the idea of the existence of the new baby must be, in some degree, must be a sample of a future of mankind, where the future of mankind has been reached in a certain touch, that someone becomes the genius, a child is born, and in due course becomes, for one reason or another, becomes a kind of a genius, and contributes to mankind what mankind has never acceded to before. And that is the thing which we should call happiness, the meaning of life.
I think Benjamin Franklin wrote that we've given the American people the right to pursue happiness, but they have to catch it on their own.
They have to have something in themselves which conveys that. Otherwise, they may have made a good contribution, but not a brilliant one. And we need brilliant ones.
Thanks.
Good afternoon, Mr. LaRouche. Rod from Brooklyn here. Hopefully you're having a good day. Things are going your way. I was to the conference this week, and I was glad to see the progress the Egyptians have made in the canal zone. Within the United States Merchant Marine in the 70s had a proposal for a two-way system. And Egypt's participation in the New Silk Road is key to North Africa and Southeast Asia and humanity at large. Do you feel humanity will be able to overcome the effects of the British Empire to stop this Silk Road project?
I think we are, some of us at least, determined to make that improvement permanent. Not only possible, but permanent. Not everybody will do it, will achieve it, but a great good part of mankind can achieve it. And that will be good enough for the rest of them.
Thank you.
Okay, next.
Good afternoon, Mr. LaRouche.
Yes.
It's Patrick from Connecticut. Good to be here. I attended the April 7th conference, which was extraordinary. This is a phenomenal movement globally, except for America. But this is not enough for the America to get on board. It was like two dinosaurs on a tiny island looking at each other after the ship left them behind. What I have done in Connecticut was to get a spot on a popular radio show, and no names or places for reasons. Last Thursday night, from 6 to 8 is the program, and I got on a little after 6. For half an hour, we spoke about Glass-Steagall and the bricks, and it was totally he would ask me questions, I'd answer them, and this is getting bigger and bigger, and this is the first media that isn't compromised yet. So What is your advice on this?
I think this is, you want to find always, find yourself in an association with people who are fresh for you in terms of their contributions to your work. And you want to keep those kinds of people, to recruit them, to join them, and to build an organization and create in that form and indefinitely. Go out and make something good in the area and do it permanently. Always find the new thing that you want to develop, the new achievement that you want to make. This is the greatest reward that mankind can generally get.
Thank you.
It's me.
Aha. Unknown
Hello.
person.
Okay, so let me see if I know how to work this. Here we go. Well, I'm Keisha. So as I was sitting here listening, I was really struck by what you have defined as the necessity for the integrated United States, and how that is being done with the representation of the Manhattan Project and New York as reviving the principle of Alexander Hamilton and what we're doing in Texas. And what struck me about that is that we are really defining right now the fight against this anti-slavery, the fight against the slavery and the anti-human conception that has dominated our United States. And I think about this idea of the Hamiltonian principle, which acted as a anti-slavery idea to what you've seen in the Confederate South. And you've talked about the Confederate South a lot. But the interesting thing is that, why was it that the space program was necessary to be put in those areas that were a part of the Confederate, or what was known or what was accepted as the Confederate South, because you had to give those people, those torn backwards regions, access to their humanity. And I think about it, when people think about the space program, they think about it as, some happy-go-lucky people making scientific experiments. But I think about it from the standpoint that we have a responsibility of integrating the entire United States and giving them access to their own humanity. And I wanted to get your sense of that, because I think there's still a failed idea and conception as to, why it is so important that we integrate the United States, and that this whole conception that has dominated the thinking and the population, the slavery that still exists. The South is still backwards. And the fact that we're actually organizing to restore the principle of a unified United States is something that's no one else is thinking about, but has to be the method by which we bring the United States and the world on one accord again. What do you think of that?
When I think of that, I think you should probably just tell other people about things that you already know. That at a certain point you had participated in the program of the space program. And up to that point, this was a fine experience. Some people were killed because of mistakes made by opportunists in the crafts. But in generally, suddenly, Obama came along, and Obama shut down the space program. Now today, what's happened is that you happen to be in a key position for fostering the revival of that program, of the space program. You're a leader in the space program. And therefore, you're going to do more to try to reach out to get more people involved in the space program. And we'll even allow people in California to participate in the space program. We may things like that. So these are the nice things that we can probably offer. But the point is that that place is there. The same area that you were working in when this was shut down is still there. And we are now trying to struggle our way out from under the mud to get into full and normal reaction to what the space program had meant in the beginning. And I think the idea of presenting that thing, look, yes, this is something which has been restricted recently, in recent times, up to these progresses in space programs. That was shut down by Obama. Now we are bringing it back. And now we know that we are capable of bringing it back. And that we're going to do it to bring it back. And we're going to bring that back to the entirety of the people of the United States, among others, right now.
Exactly.
Hello, Lynn. It's Evan from Montreal, Canada. It's a great follow-up, Keisha. But I wanted to ask you, how does your concept of energy flux density in the economy and progress upwards translate into the moral domain of mankind? In other words, how does an individual in everyday life achieve better, more productive ways of contributing and participating with the universe?
I think it's better not to think of oneself as living in that kind of context. I think it's the idea of the opportunity to get access to create something for mankind, which is beyond what mankind has otherwise been able to get. And that's the simple foundation of things that make work good from failure.
Thank you.
Hello, Lynn. It's Aaron again from Montreal. I had asked this question at the event yesterday, and I don't think I had formulated it well enough, so I didn't really get the answer I was looking for. I myself, as I said earlier, I had become involved with the organization about a year ago, and before that, I was very much part of the degeneration and the ugliness of the culture. And finding myself here today and the person that I've become, one, because of joining this organization as well as organizing myself, I struggle with fighting, as you say, the wrestle within myself and trying to figure out a way to inspire others to find the strength to fight that within themselves. And in particular, when it comes to youth and the youth movement which you started in the early 2000s, and for the future, as you mentioned, every week you're only getting older, and we're all only getting older, and the organization, a lot of the members are only getting older. So how can we, as an organization, find a way to fight or to inspire young people who are so zealous and adamant in defending the very system that is degenerating them? And in particular, I have an example for myself. I know many young artists and very talented in terms of the technical aspect of art, but very depressed in why they do what they do and the reasons for why they do what they do. And for everyone watching this all over the world and for here, really, how can we find a way to fight that zealousness within young people and so on?
Fighting is a necessary occupation. It needs matters. For example, let's take Western Canada. A whole area there have been coming suicide cases where they have been enriched and progressive. The question is, how do you answer that question? How do you account for that? Now you'll find throughout the United States, you'll find whole areas where people who are earlier progressively qualified people who suddenly become not only incompetent, but they become suicidal en masse. They use drugs, they use other devices in order to get out of the experience of their life. So this is true in much of the world. It's not just in these two areas in the phenomenon in Canada, which is significant, and the other, or so forth, or the United States. And you go into the southern states of the Americas. You see how desperate the situation is. There's a force of evil, which I would locate as taking root at the beginning of the 20th century. The Bertrand Russell influence and the Bertrand Russell legacy spread out throughout the world, much of the world, throughout the transatlantic community and so forth. And therefore, there was the generation of entire generations of people in these categories. And the point is, we have to actually campaign to bring people to understand the importance of the human individual as a creative force. And that's the only thing that will do anything for mankind, is the asserting of mankind's role as a creative force in the future.
You mentioned a lot about the going to space as being very important. I'm wondering, in terms of art and artistic expression, how can that be also used to convey these ideas? In particular, maybe certain modern mediums of art.
Well, let's take the case of Brunelleschi. You probably know something about Brunelleschi. And Brunelleschi was a person who came out of everything, and all the people who were his contrast people were incompetent. And they just had to sit there and watch him create and create and create and create. He was not absolutely unique in terms of history, but he was a pretty prominent person at a certain stage of history. And that's the way it works. Charlemagne had the same kind of quality. Charlemagne created a Europe. A European culture was created by Charlemagne. And then one day he died. And this fine thing that happened to Germany and France, in those areas, suddenly degenerated. And the lesson to be learned is you better have geniuses handy and employ them and try to find more of them and try to get rid of things which are merely trash. That's, I think, is the best answer I can give you.
Thank you.
Hi, Lynn. Hi, this is Brian from New Jersey, New York, LA. Anyways, yes. Anyway, I think I have a question with the spirit of I think the question that I run into people just thinking on a lower level, object perceptions or sense perceptions. I think many of the qualities that this spiritual aspect of mankind, for me, it really does give a sense that in just brief readings of Einstein's work, he was not a sense perceptual person. He did not believe in sense perceptions, and I think it just seems more that in music it works pretty much the same way. If you do not believe in the notes, that is, and I think if you can speak on this substance of why is it that people just have a difficult time this question of spirituality of the human race.
Well, I don't find any problem in it. First of all, it's simple. You have to have a perspective, and the perspective is that you are going to do something to cause the promoting of the creation and development of new human beings, and that you will have a part or a contribution to the development of these new human beings. Because and everything that we were supposed to do, we were supposed to educate children. Well, I can say that since Bertrand Russell came into power, we don't educate children anymore. We downgrade children. We have presidents, like Franklin Roosevelt, who were creative. We had a couple of other presidents who were creative. But most of our recent presidents are trash or worse. And therefore, the struggle is to try to create an organization in society which gets rid of the trash problem. We call it the Bertrand Russell legacy. But most people have given in. With most teachers have given in to this kind of thing, this treason against mankind. We don't develop creative minds seriously. Or if they are creative, we stultify their ability to express creative powers of development. So that's, I think, that latter issue is the point which we ought to focus on, because there are many people who are wasting their entire lives by getting rich and making the poor richer, that sort of thing. So therefore, we should actually demand of ourselves that we take into account this kind of issue and look at yourself from the standpoint of that kind of issue. What can you do to resolve your relationship to that issue?
Thank you.
Hi, it's Diane. I just, yesterday at the conference, I was actually very struck by what happened in the question and answer period, because in the morning we had Helga's speech, and then you had the Chinese representative discussing the One Belt, One Road, and I think people have some idea where China has come from or what it was under the Cultural Revolution. And then you had the speaker from Korea who was talking about the per capita income in Korea having gone from whatever it was, $100 per person, like sub-Saharan Africa, to being a major economy. And then you had the presentation from Egypt with the extraordinary transformation and potential of that country, and Helga's very distinct challenge for Americans to return to our constitutional principles and the greatest identity of our nation. And then when people got up to ask the questions, it was as if this beautiful feast had been laid out before them, and they turned around to grab something out of the garbage can. And it was like they stuck a banana peel on top of their head and said, there's so much evil and I'm so oppressed. And this, you could see the extraordinary potential. So I was just very struck by this, and by two things come to mind. One, a number of weeks ago, where you had emphasized the question of natural law, which I think is something that people don't have that great of an understanding of. And then also the question of why the music work is so important in terms of dealing with this kind of phenomenon. So I don't know if you have more to say about this.
I would say it's essential. It's absolutely. We have this echo. Okay. No, this is essential. The composition of music, in the way we're trying to follow it up to standard now, at this time, in this area, that is what's crucial. Why? Well, people say they have all kinds of uses of what they call music. What we know today, in the 20th century, most of what was called music became immediately junk. There were no more great composers. None. They were crushed. They didn't cease to exist, but they were crushed in every opportunity that the institutions could crush them. And only a handful of people actually even approximated honest musical conceptions. And you cannot separate that issue of issues from themselves. These things are important, and in their form of a classical compositional form is intrinsically essential if you're going to get a mind that is capable of understanding what music is. And that's what that's the thing, to put it right on the plate right now. That's the issue. You've got to be able to deliver classical artistic composition alive.
Thanks.
Hello, Lynn. In that light, it's sort of funny, but every time you speak about a new baby being born, I don't know if other people are having this, but I'm hearing in my head, "For unto us a child is born," from the Messiah, hearing the chorus singing it, but hearing it differently as a result of what you're saying about the concept of what it means to look at a newborn, what's really you should be thinking about, and what it means to nurture. I hate to use the word educate because that word has come to mean something that's not very human, but to nurture within the newborn that God-given capacity. But in that light, there are two other things that have been coming up in my mind as a result of the whole process of discussion since the conference. One is the distinction that you drew in the paper, one of the papers you wrote in prison, which is the difference between survival and successful survival, which is the difference between having an instinct for just mere survival versus the higher order instinct for the succession of succession of systems, which is necessary in order for survival to be realized and not just be an empty wishful thinking. And I think with a lot of Americans, raw survival is such a preoccupation. In earlier times when we had in situations where we had better presidents, the raw survival could hook in and work with the fact that there was somebody who was paying attention to the systems. But now we don't have that, and the raw survival just absolutely doesn't work. It actually turns into something self-destructive. But I was trying to figure out what is the mindset that is the difference between the raw survival and the successful survival, and that's why I was thinking about your discussion of metaphor, since the way you defined this, reinvigorated a concept of metaphor. And I was really struck yesterday when the gentleman from at the final panel, when the professor was showing the painting from China and was discussing also the Chinese characters and the Chinese language, and this matter that he raised about how each character is monosyllabic, which really shocked me, and then how it represents, it's quote unquote, it seems to be a symbolic language. But then I realized, no, there's no way Chinese could be a symbolic language, because if it was symbolic, they would have never survived all these centuries. So something else is there. And it reminded me of the discussions we had of classical Greek with Tony Pappard and other people, because the thing that suddenly hits you when you're attempting to learn Greek is that it's a language which actually functioned in the classical period with the assumption that the other person that you were speaking to had a mind. And I remember when we would work on this, I would really be struck and saying, you know, the way we use English is we always assume that the other person that we're speaking to really doesn't have a mind. And we rarely ever get into a dialogue which is above the level of kind of advanced traffic lights. You know, green is go, red is stop. And if you have enough instructions, you can make the other person do what you want them to do, which is not the same thing as discovery. And I'm really, I think in terms of the functioning of the organization, part of the answer to what we're discussing here is, and it was related to the pedagogy of music, or listen, like when we were just listening to the Furtwängler, is people have to really challenge themselves to hear the inner voice at all times of the other. That kind of discipline, and really get rid of this kind of traffic light way of having dialogue with people, because it's really not a question, I think what the Chinese example shows, because they have survived all these centuries and rediscovered and discovered, that what it shows is that what is metaphorical within language is something that's embedded in the process by which people live and work together. And there's such a strong emphasis in China on the multi-generational survival that obviously somehow this is embedded in what they're doing. But maybe you can explain this better than I can.
We're waiting for the beep to go off. Okay. There are several aspects of this question which you pose, which I can deal with here, because some of it goes deeper there. But I take it in terms of my own life. I succeeded several times in my life, and each time I coming out of military service and coming back into normal military, non-military life was quite a difference. But I was then a victim of the evil forces that came charge of this thing, and I battered around for a while, and I rose to a significance in the course of a generation, and I was put into prison. I got out of prison, and I got help, in a sense, from Bill Clinton and others who were sponsored my getting out of the prison system. And I went back into scientific work again in Russia and other parts of the world. So that's the way life sometimes goes. So the question is, what underlies the difference between one kind of experience and another? And the main thing is, which lies within the human being, or one who is prompted to living, to classical artistic composition. True classical artistic composition is the principle, the universal principle, on which everything is important is based. I know it comes in different forms of expression, but I can say classical musical composition is a paragon defining creativity. It's what the baby learns eventually, what the adult learns, and what somebody ends up producing.
Thank you.
Hi, Lynn. Round number 3. Sorry. Okay. So you mentioned a couple things that just resonated with me right now is the metaphor of the baby and classical composition. And the first thing that went through my mind when you mentioned the baby is Plato's Symposium and the idea that we all are pregnant, either in body and in mind. And how can this organization with its members help all of us refine our ability to give birth to that child, metaphorically speaking, using the classical composition, using the classical ideas of what humanity is and what the spirit of humanity is?
Well, the history of mankind shows that the history of mankind progresses through the progress of mankind. It occurs in no other way. And you find out when there's been a cutoff of periods of creativity in the history of mankind, you find that there's a cutoff. And then you look around and you find eventually somebody comes back and brings back something new, which is also creative. So the desire of mankind to become creative, to live as a creative personality, that is a driving force in and of itself. And often people will discover that them in themselves rather than discovering it from some other source. They simply get themselves that they want to think and talk in this way. They want to communicate in this way. They want to live in this kind of way. So sometimes many people are successful, not the greatest number of people, but a great number of the great people are able to do that. And if they are influential and allowed to become influential, then it works. If you get the kind of teachers that are trained under Bertrand Russell from the beginning of the 20th century, then you get a stinking project and a product to go with it. That's been the problem. That's the problem we face when we talk about the question about or the relationship of mankind to the future. There are people who are actually disgusting. They do not respect the principle of the future of mankind. That mankind must be motivated to find in himself or herself something of creativity, which gives them access to understanding something which is beautiful and which they want to serve. And I think that's the only easy way to get a description of it.
So I think just to sum that up, this culture has been born from ugly parents. Thank you.
I think we're at the end, Lynn, of the questions. I just wanted to, that's it? Okay, fine. So I just wanted to say a couple of things. I think today's been notable for several reasons. One is that we actually have a dialogue with Lynn and the policy committee because we have Diane and Keisha here. And you have an audience for that dialogue made up of organizers who've actually been qualified to actually be in it. This is a higher level, I think, meeting than we've had. There's a second element here, which is, I think, very important for people to think about. I think we almost are at the point of eliminating the idea, then you may not even have known about these ideas, but of the so-called chapter meetings or the political meetings, the way people think about what they are. I think we've almost eliminated that. That is, you have put a dialogue process into motion since last June, and we seem to now be getting something that looks like what you wanted. But I think that Diane's work at the beginning of this meeting, because that's the beginning of the meeting, so that people can become involved in thinking, and then they can actually begin to pose ideas. This whole idea that you're putting forward here now also on the poetic principle is I think, an important one. If we can, I'm just thinking about this, but I'm thinking that I wanted to tell you one thing that happened also on Thursday. There was some upset by a couple of the professional musicians about John's performance of the Dichterliebe. Oh. Well, yeah, and I think it's because he did it exactly right. It was funny. It was intense. It had tension, and I think this is important because when we talk about the idea of classical culture, it's a weapon. John's role here, particularly as we saw what happened last week at the Messiah last week, and his role on Thursday is important to not merely note, but I think to point out as exemplary of what I think you want us doing in the Manhattan Project. So I'm just expressing that because that's to see if I'm right.
I would say that's good. Good. That's pretty good.
Okay. All right. So if you have anything else to say to us, please go ahead. And
I should say we should be more creative than you've ever been before.
He always does that.
Uh-oh.
Good. We'll definitely see you again.
Okay. Okay, well, see if I can find you again.
Bye.